Fox hunting. It's a very cruel practice indeed, and it was banned in England and Wales in 2005. However, within mere weeks of the ban coming into force, a new practice called trail hunting was invented as a legal workaround. Rather than tracking a live fox, hounds would follow a pre-laid scent. Technically legal. In the 20 years since, it's provided cover for hunts to continue pretty much as they always have. 20 years, and we've introduced one law that hasn't stopped it. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. Trail hunting done genuinely, where the hounds follow a pre-laid scent and in the end no animal is harmed, is absolutely not a cruel practice. Nor is it one that I have any issue with whatsoever. And indeed there are real positives to it as a countryside activity. The issue that I'm going to talk about in this video is solely that trail hunting as a legal category creates an unenforceable distinction, and one that the evidence shows is being widely exploited and abused by many in order to continue hunting foxes illegally. But now we have a second attempt to make the first one actually mean something. In March 2026, the UK government opened a public consultation specifically to close the loophole that trail hunting provided. However, the gap between what Parliament voted for and what's actually been happening out in the countryside, I believe tells you a lot more about this subject than any statistic I could give you. So what I want to talk about in this video is kind of the one thing that the debate always seems to kind of edge around, especially from those on the pro side of fox hunting in these government debates. The foxes themselves. The actual individual, whose well-being is, of course, very directly tied up in this issue. I want to look candidly at exactly what, or I would argue who, they are, and what these hunts do to them. I love foxes, as I've said many times before, and I'll continue to proudly say. They're my favourite animal, and really the key reason I decided to start writing in the first place. And writing them honestly, and in a way that will allow the reader to really feel what's going on behind the flash of orange that we see darting across in front of us in the hedgerow, requires understanding deeply what they experience, including the humbling but very real issue of human cruelty towards them. But I must warn you, the clips that I'm going to share in this video haven't been censored at all outside of protecting the individual's identities, and show the hunts exactly as they happen. Because one of the most important things in my view regarding education is showing things exactly as they are. For any graphic or potentially disturbing content that's included in this video, I'm going to give you a timestamp and a chance to pause the video so that you can skip past that graphic nature and continue with the video without seeing the graphic things. But I would encourage you, if you are seriously looking to combat fox hunting as a practice and you aren't aware of exactly what goes on, I would argue it's worth knowing. But if you are of a sensitive nature and you don't like that sort of thing or it affects you negatively, then please do, take the opportunity to skip ahead. So with that out of the way, let's begin. In most of this debate, especially around the regulations and laws, the fox themselves is barely present as a matter of discussion. They tend to be looked upon as a pest or a symbol or some kind of cultural flashpoint, depending on who's talking. And the actual creature, by which I mean the thing whose life is not unlike our own, an experience of the world around them, gets very little discussion time. A red fox's hearing spans nearly 10 octaves. She can hear frequencies far above the range of any human being. Indeed, she can pinpoint a vole moving through frosted grass 30 metres away from her, in the silence of the field. She can locate the origin of a sound to within 1 degree at the frequencies she's using when hunting. Her sense of smell even exceeds the famously sharp nose of the domestic dog. The stiff black whiskers on her face and forelegs are sensitive enough to read the surface and generate a clear image of whatever she has in her mouth at point-blank range, where her eyes can no longer focus. Do you remember that song from a few years ago that highlighted the long-standing question, what does the fox say? Well, she has a vocabulary of more than 20 distinct calls, which include the so-named staccato contact bark that sounds different whether called from a dog or a vixen, the alarm cough that sends cubs underground, the screaming call in January that I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with, and which most people mistake for something dying or someone screaming, but is actually foxes calling to each other. As well as many other distinct sounds. And she is, by every measurable account, and in the utmost of importance to this subject, an individual. To me, although the content of our experience may be very different, there really is no fundamental difference between human beings, foxes, squirrels, crabs, and bandicoots. Real bandicoots, not whatever that fella Crash is supposed to be. Every individual is a unique personality, arguably more so in the mammalian world than any other. If this was ever in doubt, for whatever reason, research published in peer-reviewed journals has documented personality variation in foxes from before their eyes open. Differences in boldness, caution, curiosity that persist through into adult life, and shape how that specific fox responds to risk, navigates its territory, and behaves under threat. These are not human projections layered on top of animal behaviour. They're documented differences between individual animals, taken by the researchers that really take this subject seriously. And indeed, anyone who lives with an animal will tell you, I'm sure, exactly the same thing with no reservation. She's also monogamous, often for life. If she has non-breeding daughters from a previous litter, they will often stay to look after the cubs from the next generation, grooming the cubs, protecting the den, and in rare cases, spontaneously lactating to feed the cubs that aren't theirs when something goes wrong. Very family-like, one could argue. She has a territory she's learned over months, holding a cognitive map of every gap in every hedge, every drain, every place to hide, and every danger to avoid. I'm going through all this because the conversation on fox hunting rarely ever starts here, and I think it should. Politics and culture, I argue, pale in comparison to the importance of the individual themselves. Acknowledging that foxes, and indeed all animals, are really not so different to ourselves as we often believe. The night before a hunt, terriermen go out into the countryside and block up fox dens, or earths, sealing up the entrances so that when the hounds start running and the fox is looking for somewhere to go, there is nowhere to go. A fox's primary defence against a predator that it can't outrun is to go underground, and the hunt removes that option the night before the fox even realises it's being hunted. Foxes are crepuscular, meaning that they are most active at dawn and dusk. Hunts meet at mid-morning, when a fox has fed and is resting in cover. She's stalked during her physiological rest cycle. In daylight hours, she's not built to operate at full capacity. She hears the pack before she sees it. 30 to 40 hounds in formation. Horns, horses, a full-on sensory assault at the exact frequencies her ears were designed to detect from half a mile away. So, what does she do? Of course, she runs. A fox can sprint at around 48 kilometers per hour, but she can't sustain that for more than a few hundred meters. Sprinting full speed burns through all her energy reserves almost immediately. Conversely, the pack of hounds behind her is built to hold 25 to 35 miles per hour in coordinated formation for far longer. They were selectively bred for this exact purpose over centuries. She has no chance, and she never did. She uses everything her territory taught her. She's running hard, across the full cognitive map of her territory at speed, burning resources that her body had allocated for rest, while every den and every hole she knows has been sealed shut. The closest physiology study we have as to what this does to an animal's body comes from a 1997 Royal Society study on red deer hunted by hounds. And yes, to be clear, this was on red deer, not foxes. Peer-reviewed data specifically on foxes doesn't exist, but what the study found is certainly worth knowing. In the bodies of these deer, the researchers recorded the following: glycogen depleted to exhaustion, cortisol at the highest levels ever recorded in that species, breakdown of muscle tissue, and the disintegration of red blood cells. The researchers concluded that the red deer was simply not adapted, either through their evolutionary history or their individual lives, to cope with what was happening to them. The UK government's own independent query in 2000, the Burns Inquiry, considered all of this and concluded, in its own words, that the chase, quote, seriously compromises the welfare of the fox. And that came from the inquiry commissioned by Parliament. The hunting lobby has long described the kill as a single, quick bite to the back of the neck from the leading hound. Instantaneous, painless, at least as painless as a bite can be, and therefore humane. However, the University of Bristol was commissioned by the Burns Inquiry to perform post-mortems on foxes recovered from hunts. Their findings are in the official public records. The foxes killed above ground were not killed by a single clean bite. The post-mortem language described in the findings described, quote, profound trauma by repeated dog bite, little tissue damage in the head, neck and shoulder region. Pronounced damage to the ribcage and thoracic organs, and profound damage to the abdomen. The death did not come from a cervical bite, but from what happened after, once the leading hound had made contact and the rest of the pack arrived. Multiple dogs pulling at the body in different directions, with the ribcage and abdomen taking the impact. Burns concluded explicitly that death is not always affected by a single bite to the neck or the shoulder by the leading hound. The vets also concluded that the time between the first contact and the death simply could not be determined by the post-mortem evidence. In other words, the claim that it's instant or within a few seconds isn't supported by the science. It can't confirm it either way. Most people have at some point had the wind completely knocked out of them. A fall, walking into a door, getting thumped by a jerk in the gut. That moment where the chest locks and breathing simply stops. I'm sure you know the feeling. It sucks. That's a single impact, absorbed in a fraction of a second, and it's enough to stop you in your tracks and leave you panicking and gasping for air. The post-mortem findings describe profound damage to not a single rib, but the entire ribcage. Multiple simultaneous bite forces to the area that's designed to protect the lungs and heart, while the abdomen is being pulled at from different directions by a pack of hounds that have just arrived at full speed. Trauma medicine classifies this category of injury as among the most physiologically severe event the human body can experience. The pain response alone is sufficient to cause shock. The difference is that a human patient in this condition receives anaesthetics, surgery and treatment within minutes. The fox has none of that. Only the constant continuation of what's happening to it for an amount of time that, as the vets noted, couldn't be determined from what remained. To put this experience into perspective, imagine being winded so badly that you couldn't breathe at all, while simultaneously feeling your ribcage being crushed from multiple directions, while your abdomen is being torn open, with no relief, no painkillers, no end in sight, and nobody to help you. Assuming that death does not come immediately as claimed, that's fox hunting. If you'd like to follow what I'm writing, which is the fiction that comes out of research like this, the link to the newsletter is in the description. Sign up and you'll get a free copy of the prologue to Russet in your inbox straight away, along with selected scenes and writing notes as things develop. If the fox reaches a den or an earth that wasn't stopped up, and occasionally they do, a terrier is sent in on a radio collar. The fox is underground, backed against the dead end of the den and unable to retreat further, totally unable to escape. This standoff can last minutes or considerably longer while the terriermen above locate the fight electronically and then start digging down to it. Burns documented one fox who was dug out for a full 25 minutes. Her post-mortem showed bite wounds to the face and head, damage to the right eye, and hemorrhage around the larynx and lower neck. Again, all this with no painkillers and no relief in sight, and she was still alive. Finally, she was shot. And of course, to make matters worse, the first bullet didn't kill her. She was shot a second time. On this, Burns said, "The activity of digging out and shooting a fox involves a serious compromise of its welfare, bearing in mind the often protracted nature of the process and the fact that the fox is prevented from escaping." The Hunting Act of 2004 banned the hunting of wild mammals with dogs in England and Wales, and it came into force in February 2005. Within weeks, trail hunting was invented, the claim that dogs were following artificially laid scents rather than a live fox. Technically legal, and it provided a ready defence should a fox happen to die on the day of a hunt. The hounds were following a trail, the fox was just collateral, an accident. In August of 2020, 2 private webinars run by the Masters of Foxhounds Association were recorded and leaked. In them, the association's director is filmed advising around 100 hunt masters on how trail hunting should work in practice. His words were as follows: "It's a lot easier to create a smokescreen if you've got more than one trail layer operating, and that's what it's all about. Trying to portray to the people watching that you're going about your legitimate business." He was charged and convicted of encouraging illegal hunts under the Serious Crime Act. The Deputy Chief Magistrate found that he was, quote, "clearly encouraging the mirage of trail laying to act as a cover for old-fashioned, illegal hunting." That conviction was later overturned on appeal, on the narrow grounds of the legal intent threshold. But the appeal judge himself noted that, quote, "someone listening to his words might well have taken the view that he was encouraging illegal hunting." The director's words are also on record. What he intended by them at this point is a matter for one to decide for oneself. In July of 2024, the huntsman and whipper-in, the person who essentially keeps the hounds on track, of the West Norfolk Foxhounds were convicted of illegal fox hunting after a fox was killed on a family's patio and captured on their CCTV. And the conviction was upheld on appeal in October of 2024. The appeal judge remarked that, "We do not think that Bell and Eggington are the only guilty people. They are the only 2 in court." This is why the Defra Consultation opened in March 2026, effectively to ban trail hunting and close the loophole that has rendered the original law effectively unenforceable for the last 2 decades. A YouGov poll from November 2024 found that 79% of the UK public want this hunting ban to remain. That figure, although in my opinion shockingly low, has held steady for the full 20 years since the Act first came into force. Now, there are people who hunt and hold genuinely that what they do is both culturally and ecologically valid. That position is not necessarily invalid and deserves to be engaged with rather than dismissed, so let's take a look at the main arguments. The first is that foxes cause significant damage to livestock, particularly lambs. This is a reasonable argument to assume. However, the Burns inquiry found that less than 2% of viable lamb deaths in England and Wales are attributable to foxes, with the remaining 95% or so caused by husbandry problems, disease, cold, or complications at birth. The majority of sheep farmers surveyed reported no lamb losses to foxes whatsoever. The second argument is that hunting is an effective method of population control. A 2002 study, published by Nature, examined what happened to fox numbers during the 10-month hunting pause caused by the foot and mouth outbreak. Every scientific attempt to measure whether fox hunting actually controls the fox population has returned the same thing: that foxes removed from a territory are replaced by neighbouring foxes or new foxes moving in. The biology simply doesn't support the argument. And the third is that hounds are a more humane method of death than the alternatives. However, the Burns inquiry tentatively concluded that an accurate shot with a rifle, when done properly, has fewer adverse welfare implications than hunting with hounds. Even the veterinary lobby that supports hunting acknowledges that snaring, which remains legal in England, causes serious welfare harm. I hold a clear position. I think that fox hunting as it's currently practiced causes unnecessary harm to an individual, one whose sensory experience, family bonds and individual character, science can now describe in real detail. I think that the evidence we've looked at briefly here supports that position, and I believe that the 79% of the UK public who want to see this ban upheld are right. Fox hunting doesn't appear in my novel series, Russet, and I'm not planning on putting it there. But it may well appear in future novels or other writing projects. But more immediately than that, I want to write my animal characters as individuals with inner lives that the reader can inhabit and really feel themselves. This requires understanding, in today's example, what the fox's body is built for, what she senses and what she does under threat, what she thinks and feels once she realises that there's no escape, and what she experiences once the hounds finally catch up. The research I've done for this video, many parts of which were emotionally rather hard, the sensory biology, the cognitive mapping, the family dynamics and all that sort of thing, feeds directly into my writing, my style and generally the goals that I hope for my writing to achieve. My whole purpose of writing exclusively animal perspective stories is highlighting experientially for you that they have an inner experience worth taking seriously, which is what Russet and The Christmas Gift and all my future projects will be built on. If the Defra Consultation is still open as you're watching this, and it closes I believe on the 18th of June 2026, you can find it at consult.defra.gov.uk. The link is in the description. It asks for your view as to whether trail hunting should be banned, and it takes a few minutes to complete. I think it's worth doing, especially if you're a big fox lover like me. If this is the sort of thing you want to follow, please do subscribe and leave a comment. It genuinely helps this content reach the people who care about it. The fox has been running from humans and hounds since way before any of us were born. The Burns inquiry said that their welfare was seriously compromised in the year 2000, and in 2026 we're still arguing as to whether to properly enforce the law that was supposed to help them.